school year going forward. We're going to win because if you're gay, if you're transgender, you shouldn't have to worry about your state or the governor of the state attacking you. We are proud of you. We're going to fight on you. We're going to stand up for you. That's it. Children were slaughtered in their classroom. 2 teachers. Our kids and the people in our community. That's what we're going to do when we win this race. We're going to win this race because you and I are sick of our high property taxes. Our high electricity bills, the high cost of living in the state of Texas. In fact, we want to go to where the most vulnerable Texans are and make them first and ensure that they too are able to get ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, as we sleep comfortably in our homes and apartments here in Victoria, I am in a hotel room here in Victoria. There will be kids who will be sleeping in the offices of Child Protective Services, in the hallways, under the desks, atop the tables. 32,000 kids in that system, and it is the worst run in the United States of America. And it has nothing to do with the CPS caseworkers who are doing their level best, even though they're not paid enough to be able to do this. They're not paid enough in their retirement to be able to afford it without working a second job. There are not enough of them to take care of the kids who are in their care right now. 6 years ago, a federal judge, Judge Jack, right here in Texas, told Greg Abbott, Mr. Governor, with all due respect, these kids emerge from this program more damaged than when they went in. This January, 6 years later, she says that problem has gone from bad to worse. 100 children who were in the custody and care of the state of Texas have lost their lives just since the year 2020. Others have been trafficked and sexually abused. He has privatized the care for those who do not have a lobbyist, who do not have billionaire donors who are there to advocate for them, who do not have the lobbyists or the lawyers. All they have is us, and we are going to have their backs, stand up and vote, and make sure we turn around Child Protective Services. Help those kids in the hospital system. Living up to its values. The things that we do today through our government, the headlines that we're making around the world, that is not who we are here in Victoria. That is not who we are back in my hometown of El Paso, Texas. Now, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, no me importa, all of you are welcome here right now. We can agree that we can do better going forward, right? Right now, we got a government who is intent on telling you who you're supposed to hate or be afraid of, or fear next. He uses this to distract us from the big things that we should be able to do. You know, I want to make sure that we're focused on public ed, like we just talked about, turning around CPS, or wouldn't it be nice if we fixed the grid, or expanded Medicaid, or did all the things that most of us, regardless of differences and party affiliation, can actually agree on. But when you approach the governor, and I don't really to be able to do it in a town hall like this, because I understand he doesn't come to Victoria to take your questions in a town hall like this. But should you be able to do that? And you're saying, Mr. Governor, how is it that in February of last year, more than 700 of our fellow Texans lost their lives when the temperature dropped? And in the energy capital of the world, the grid failed, and the person in the highest position of power could not keep the power going on for the people he is supposed to serve. Folks who died of hypothermia, of carbon monoxide inhalation, who burned up in their homes and apartments trying to keep themselves and their kids warm. And now, not only is the grid not fixed, but we're each paying $45 more per average on our utility bills just to be able to stay in our homes. We asked him that question, and he says, look out, Mexicans at the border. We say, Mr. Governor, why is it that we have spent 10 weeks talking about grieving with those families in Uvalde, and you have yet to convene the legislature in a special session just to do anything at all? I mean, you get to pick it, Mr. Governor. You want to increase mental health care? You can do that. You want to strengthen and solidify the security of these schools? Well, get after it. You want to have common sense gun laws that most of us, gun owners, non-gun owners, Democrats, Republicans, can agree on? The door is wide open. But when we ask him that question, he says, watch out, transgender kids are coming to our schools. No matter what the issue that we raise, that is legitimate, and in our common interests here in this state, he will distract us with who we are supposed to hate and who we are supposed to be afraid of. In Grand Rapids, Texas today, it is you or me. In our Texas after we win, it is you and it is me. It is every single one of us. That your community gets its fair share of state funding in the 9th largest economy on the planet. $2 trillion gross domestic product, $250 billion biannual budget. I want to make sure that the investment is made here in infrastructure, in schools, in broadband internet. We were looking at the statistics today. Fully a quarter of the people who live in this county cannot reliably get online to use the internet. Now, try getting what you raise if you're a farmer, what you grow to market. Try finishing your education. Try finding a job. Try finding employees if you're a small business owner. If you're lonely and single, try finding a date if you cannot get on the internet. Be online in this day and age. Let me make sure that whether you live in Victoria or Austin, Texas, broadband internet is just a fact of life that you can count on. What if we made sure that the investment in your roads, your bridges, your water system, your wastewater system, which is something that you can count on? What if you knew that I know the teacher on average in this county is underpaid by $13,500 a year against the national average? Not the highest paid teacher in America, it's just a what if you do that together? Instead of relying on the property taxpayer to foot the bill, we up the share of state spending from Austin that comes right here to Victoria and pay those teachers $13,500 more every year going forward. That's what happens when we have a government who serves all of us without regard to the differences between us. Who do you love? How you pray? What country you come from? How many generations you can count yourself a Texan? Or whether you just came here yesterday. I want to make sure this state is allowing you to fulfill your potential, to live up to your full promise, to do better for yourself and your family, and in so doing, to do better for all of us. So brought me here tonight. That's why I'm out here on this campaign trail. And as the commissioner said, I think that's why we're doing so well. When Quinnipiac, which is the gold standard in political polling, took the measure of this race back in December, we just got in. It said we were 15 points down. Now, in that time, in those 7 months, until the last poll came out last month, we have not spent a dime on TV trying to lift our image or tear down that or the other guy. While he has spent millions upon millions doing the same for himself. Well, those 15 points have shrunk down to 5 points today. And as the commissioner said, not only have we outraised the city governor of the state of Texas, but we have 500,000 contributions, individual contributions. The single greatest group of donors, school teachers right here in the state of Texas. We have 83,000 people who signed up to take a shift, to knock on doors, to meet the voters who are going to decide the outcome of this election. And this is where I'll land and where we're going to turn the microphone over to you with this thought. In addition to all the other challenges that I share with you here tonight, teachers leaving the profession by the thousands because of the disrespect we're showing them. Those kids suffering in CPS care. Your fear about what happens this winter without the grid being fixed. For those of you who are being priced out of your homes, cut property taxes that are out of control, perhaps the most consequential for us as Americans in this great democracy is the fact that it's harder to vote or to register to vote in the state of Texas than in any other state in the Union. So that in March of this very year, during our primary elections, a 95-year-old World War II veteran put his life on the line for this country, fighting fascism half a world away to defend our democracy right here at home. His request to mail his ballot in a pandemic that has claimed nearly 100,000 lives in this state was rejected not once, but 3 times. Because, you see, last year, the state legislature passed a bill signed into law by Greg Abbott that forces you to use the same form of ID with which you originally used to register to vote, and match that against the mail-in ballot request that you're requesting today, even if you first registered to vote more than 70 years ago. 13% of the mail-in ballots cast in the state of Texas were rejected in the state of Texas in the March election. If we watched the news tonight, and the anchor said there were elections in Venezuela or in Cuba today, and 13% of the ballots were rejected, we'd say, you know what, that checks out. Those places are not real democracies. They're not like us. But 246 years into this experiment, which I believe defines this country and sets us apart not only from most of the rest of the world, but almost the entirety of human history. We can freely and fairly choose those who will represent and serve us in these positions of public trust. We might very well lose it, and lose it as soon as this year, unless we're willing to stand and fight for it. So I ask you, in the land that produced Dr. Lawrence Nixon, who in 1924 stood against the white primary, which disallowed voting from African Americans in this state for 20 years and took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, where he won it not once, but twice, this El Pasoan, our fellow Texan. To LBJ, the first Texas president, who watched a 24-year-old John Lewis attempt to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama on Bloody Sunday in March of 1965, and a week later convenes a joint session of Congress and says, you know what, we're not a real democracy when not everyone is allowed to participate. We don't hear every voice, and not every vote is counted. He signed the law, the Voting Rights Act, that created the true first multiracial democracy in this country, perhaps this planet's history. That is our inheritance. That is our heritage. What we do at this moment of maximum peril for our democracy will determine our future. And I believe, as a parent of 3 kids that were raised in El Paso, it will define us in the eyes of our children, our grandchildren, and in history books yet to be written down the road. This is the moment for each and every one of us to stand and be counted, to sign up, to volunteer, to knock on doors, to reach out to the very Texans who are the focus of this voter suppression and voter intimidation in our state, and invite them into this democracy, invite them into this election, and with your help, make them, the very people who are not supposed to participate, the margin of victory when we win this on the night of November 8th. Victoria, thank you for having us up. Looking forward to answering your questions and hearing what's going on. So I know that's good. So Cynthia's got a second microphone. And here's the deal. We are on day 17 of a 49-day straight push through the state of Texas. And if you told me we were on day 1017, I wouldn't argue with you. Feels like we've been on the road forever, like in the best. Like last night in El Campo, 400 people showed up in that community. Lake Jackson, Dallas, we also go on Port Arthur, communities like Bowie, communities like Kewanee, communities like Pamela, communities where Democrats fear to tread. And because statewide Democratic nominees have not shown up in years past, Republicans don't have to contest the election in November, and those folks go functionally unrepresented. The reason we're showing up in these cities, the reason we showed up in you tonight, is to listen to you and learn from you, and make sure that after we win, we can hit the ground running on delivering for victory. So Cynthia will recognize you. If you raise your hand, she'll bring that mic over to you, and I'm all yours. Go for it.
A couple announcements before we start. So if you are not registered to vote and you need to get registered to vote, we have somebody here that can do that. Neha, can you please raise your hand so folks can see who you are? Again, folks, if you are not registered to vote and there's a table back over there, see folks waiting, please go see them and they can get you registered to vote. And then also, I'd like to recognize Josh Tutt. He's the candidate for Texas State District 18.
Today's meeting or before the league, but if you want to find them, raise your hand and they can come over here. They'll sign you up for a walkout to go out on the voice as well.
Okay, this is going to be our first question, but before we go, I would just ask if I can get to as many folks with their hands up. Please just keep it to one question. Thank you.
Hey there.
I'm pretty great. And you care, and you have a heart of love that's caring and loving and ready to serve God's people. So that's what we're going to have to go and because He cares for everybody, not just anybody. So
thank you so much.
Okay, I see my next question right here. Would also like to recognize Mr. John Griffin, a previous county chair. In the back right over here. Thank you for being here.
What can they do about my mom who's 80 years old in Del Rio and has to travel to San Antonio just for a macular appointment with a specialist? There are no specialists. You're one town, we are two, and we got no slack that we have no medical. We don't want to call anyone. My sister's gone. ULD, have to go video, pick her up, bring her in. One time they tell her to come in. I said, my money can drive. She was fixing her car. We need help in the borders when it comes to medical issues.
Absolutely.
Specialists.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the question. You know, I mentioned earlier that the young lady asked about medical care in a place like Del Rio. Hard to get to Del Rio from where we are, right? A little bit harder than other parts of the state. You know, no direct flights to Del Rio. We try to get there by like my hometown or El Paso or some of these smaller communities that we're visiting in the Panhandle, North Texas and East Texas. These are the places that are written off, taken for granted, left on. Since Abbott has been going, 16 rural hospitals have closed down in the state of Texas. That means, like the family member in Del Rio, we're now driving hundreds of miles to be able to get care. When that is compounded by the fact that if you're underpaid by $13,500 a year as a school teacher here in Bowie, Texas, you're underpaid by $16,500 a year, and you're waiting for that hospital that's closed down to reopen. Very hard to keep young people, to keep families, to keep anybody living in those towns, and the remaining people are paying more and more property taxes because there are fewer homeowners there to shoulder the burden. So, how do we meet this challenge? I mentioned Medicaid expansion earlier, brings in that $10 billion a year. That not only helps to stand up on more of these closed hospitals and clinics, it helps to hire providers in communities like Del Rio, Texas, that are right now underserved. It also lowers your property tax bill because you're no longer on the hook for uncompensated care at your county hospital because we have expanded Medicaid. Once we expanded, those folks are covered and you no longer have to pay their bill when they got too sick and took themselves to the hospital. And here's the last one. We were in Fort Stockton, Vegas County, very underserved community. And a woman at a town hall just like this stood up and said, hey, I heard you talk about expanding Medicaid. That sounds wonderful. But find me the doctor in this community who will take that. We don't have enough providers to begin with. This guy stands up and he says, actually, I'm a doctor from Del Rio originally. I take Medicaid, I take Medicare. I'll take you in even if you have no insurance or no money to pay at all. That guy really got me, so I went up to him afterwards and I said, tell me your story. Born and raised in Fort Stockton, graduated from high school, went to college, but could not afford medical school. So what the state of Texas did back then, in a program that no longer exists under regular, but back then, they said, you know what, Aurelio, that was his name, we'll pay for your medical school education on the condition that you move back to Fort Stockton and live in our dispensing there for at least 6 years. The kicker, I was talking to him in his 8th year back. He met someone from Fort Stockton, married, had kids, had the roots. They weren't going anywhere. For the bargain price of a medical school education, that community got a full-time doctor growing one of their own. What if we revived that program in Texas? And whether it's Victoria or Del Rio, Thank you for this great question. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I want to make sure as I answer this, I'll bring all this on the same page. I mentioned earlier, total ban on abortion, signed by Rape Act. No exceptions for rape, no exceptions for incest. And in case you missed it, when you signed this bill into law, the reporter said, Mr. Governor, you realize there's no exception for rape in this bill. And the governor responded, we're going to eliminate rape in the state of Texas. Under Greg Abbott, more rapes have been committed in the state of Texas than any other state. Under Greg Abbott, there are thousands of untested rape kits at DPS headquarters in Austin, Texas right now. Under Greg Abbott, our ability to bring perpetrators to justice has declined by half. So more of these violent crimes being committed, fewer people being brought to justice, fewer women getting the help and the care they need. And then there's this. Not only have we made it impossible for women to get access to the constitutionally protected right to an abortion, but when you close down that reproductive health care clinic in that community, we're talking about Del Rio and some of these underserved communities, you are also closing down the one place that many women can go to get a cervical cancer screening, to get any family planning help at all, or to see a doctor in the least insured state in America. We now lead most of the developed world in the rate of maternal mortality. And for black women in the state of Texas, it's 3 times as deadly. These are the mortal consequences of this agenda that is so cruel and so extreme and so out of step with the rest of us. 89% of Texans who were just told after the Dobbs decision overturned Roe versus Wade said that they disagree with Greg Abbott's total ban on abortion because they believe they should be able to make their own choices, or they're concerned about maternal mortality rate, or they're worried about the women in their lives for themselves for that matter. So the question is, what are we going to do about this? Now imagine on the night of November 8th that for the first time in 32 years, since Ann Richards, who was one of the greatest scholars in Texas, Richards won in 1990. We elect not just a Democrat, but a proud pro-choice Democrat. That mandate, that shockwave that moves throughout the state, as it adds to the waves we're picking up right now from Kansas, where a state not to be far better than Texas, defeated anti-abortion amendment by 60-40. Democrats and Republicans alike to come to the table to at a minimum overturn this very cruel ban on women being able to have their own reproductive health care freedom. But we need to go further than that, because if you are like me, I am sick and tired of playing defense or being on the back foot or just preparing for the next shock and then reacting to it. We have to stand up proudly and boldly and fight for the people that we believe in. In this case, it is the women of Texas. And lest anybody think this is a pipe dream, this is impossible, or the odds are too stacked against us right now. Remember that in 1972, abortion was also outlawed in the state of Texas. And no one came to our rescue. No one saved the day. There was no knight in shining armor. It was Texas women. It was Janie Roe of Roe versus Wade, but it was also her 2 attorneys, both Texas women. Sarah Williamson from Amalie, Linda Coffey, who still lives in Dallas. Those 3 women successfully argued the case before an all-male Supreme Court, and 49 years ago won that landmark decision that stood the test of nearly half a century in America. It was Texas women who won the day in 1973. It will be Texas women who win the day in 2022.
Thank you. I love listening to you talk. My name's Rick McCoy. I live here in Victoria County. I'd like to know when we're going to bring medical and recreational cannabis to Texas. I know it would generate jobs, but we need to look at the Oklahoma and their program they have today. Last year they generated $50 million in taxes alone. On top of that, bills like HB 488 and 788 were the bills that govern the trade in Oklahoma. I've been with the Meridian for 7 years now. And it's time we bring it to Texas. Everybody's selling it in the major cities. They're doing it online. and everything else, when we can grow it right here, we can produce products right here. We can do it.
Well, Rick, thank you for being here. In addition to everything that Rick just said, I cannot tell you how many veterans I have met, whether they served in Vietnam, whether they just came back from Afghanistan or what, who say, look, I came back with PTSD, or traumatic brain injury, or some signature wound or condition from my service to our country. And the VA wants to prescribe me an opioid, to which I may become addicted, and from which I may die. But that's the one thing that makes me feel okay, that increases my appetite enough to keep me alive, that allows me to sleep at night, being able to use cannabis. But if I do, I'm somehow a criminal in the eyes of the law, in the very state, the very country that I put my life on the line to defend in the first place. So, what we're going to do after we win this election is legalize marijuana. We believe in justice, we believe in fairness. And given the fact, as the gentleman said, as Rick just said, even though it's illegal in Texas, if you apply it, you can find it. And Texans of all races and ethnicities are using marijuana at the same rate. But disproportionately, it is black and brown Texans who are stopped, who are frisked, who are incarcerated for possession of this substance, who, upon release from prison, have to check the box on every employment application, saying that they have this conviction, making it less likely that they can get that job and get on with their lives. So, in addition to legalizing, we must expunge the arrest record. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do. At the beginning of the pandemic, we're thanking you, and we're so grateful for you. And yet, 2 years after that pandemic began, you're still there, and the job is no less easy, or no less difficult, no less dangerous. And yet, very often, because of the nursing shortage that we have, you get the frustration and anxiety and the ire of so many people who come in and are wondering, why is it taking so long to be able to see a doctor or a nurse or a medical provider? So I think you just need to hear from me and all of us. You are our hero. You got your back. We do all you can. We are in Texas 20,000 nurses short today. So a nurse-to-patient ratio that in some clinical settings was 1 to 4 is now 1 to 6, is now 1 to 8, is even worse in some places, causing many nurses to leave those jobs and become travel nurses, and to make sometimes 2 or 3 times what they were making back in Victoria or in El Paso, Texas, no longer in these communities. So what are we going to do? One, to meet that shortage. I mentioned this about doctors and medical specialists in places like Del Rio. We need to extend this to nurses as well. If you come from a community that is underserved and your profession is in demand and we otherwise can't get you there, why don't we pay the cost of your nursing school education? If you've already taken on debt and are struggling to pay it back, why don't we wipe that clean so you have every reason to come back to Victoria and practice medicine here and be there for your patients. Let's also hire more nurse educators. We've got a constriction in the pipeline right there about it. Let's make sure that it's easier for more nurses to get into the profession. And the last thing that you asked, right now Texas is a so-called right-to-work state, which means it's very hard for workers in any organization to be able to organize, to use their combined value to get better wages, better working conditions, a safer workplace. Let's change right to work to right to organize in the state of Texas. So and we can also look at the law and continue to make it.
Thank you. My name is Valerie, and I'm in Victoria, Texas. Government is our main mental health place to go. They only have one psychiatrist. Governor Abbott has defunded mental health by over $210 million in the past couple of years. My son passed away last month. He killed himself. They gave him a 2-month appointment to come in and see him. And he's got 2 children. And they have problems. My other 2-year-old granddaughter will not go to a psychologist anymore because she's afraid to say anything. My 19-year-old is dead. And I'm worried and concerned. Are you going to refund the mental health? And are you going to require for the mental health police to be more than 8 hours educated to help with mental health crisis?
I just want to say, I know that I speak for everybody here. I'm so sorry for your loss, for what you and your grandchildren are going through right now. And I know that you stand up right now, not for yourself. It is too late for us to save your son, but you're standing up right now so that we can save the life of somebody else in this community. So we can be there for the grandkids. And you will. And then you will get your 51st today in the country. That's every state in the District of Columbia, and then it's Texas. And the ability to see a mental health care provider. In some communities, there's 1 psychiatrist or 2 psychologists or 3 social workers. In some of the communities that I mentioned at the start of this meeting, there is no mental health care provider at all. We see rising rates of substance abuse. And if you think about the connection, if I'm uninsured, without expanded Medicaid, if I have an untreated mental illness and I'm in pain and I'm suffering, I might very well try to medicate myself in the only way that I know how and can afford. Lest we judge those who have this challenge right now, or even think about incarcerating them. What they really need is help and treatment and recovery and rehabilitation to make sure that we know our lives. So, in addition to expanding Medicaid, which will begin to fund the gap we have in mental health care, let's also acknowledge that that will be insufficient to the task at hand. You can't bring in $10 billion a year every year and go from 51st to 1st, and that's where I want to be. We're going to need to make more state resources available to mental health care providers. And the woman asked about the $211 million that Greg Abbott took out of this state's mental health care budget the month before Uvalde. The month before he got on that stage, the day after that massacre, and said, this is a mental health care issue in Texas, and we should do something about it. Well, not only did he take us all the way down to 51st, he took whatever meager amounts of money we had, and $211 million was empty for something God only knows what, because it pales in comparison to the need that we have here in this community, or the need that they have in theirs. Let's make sure, I mentioned the most vulnerable among us. I was talking about kids in the foster care program. I was talking about children with intellectual and medical complexities and disabilities that need our attention and help to live independently and be able to live to their full potential. But I'm also talking about people who need mental health care in the state of Texas. Think about this, because those to whom we propose this, after you live this, they'll say, that's all. We already expanded Medicaid, because we'll get that. And now you're asking us for more to fully fund mental health care, trying to get us first in the nation. That's going to be really expensive. And What we need to say is, right now the county jail system is the largest provider of mental health care services. You and I, as taxpayers in this county, pay $120 a night to keep someone locked up who has schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or clinical depression, who for a fraction of that, we can give consistent preventative care so they're healthy enough and well enough to raise their kids, go to work, start a business, finish their education, run a business, whatever they're doing in their community. So yes, I support you on that, and we're going to do it. Thank you.
Hello, Beto. Hi there. Beto, in your opening comments, you said some things that were very important. You talked about the civil rights movement. You mentioned John Lewis, the gentleman from El Paso, Dr. Lawrence Nixon, Dr. Nixon. And earlier this year, on last year, 21, Greg Abbott signed a bill into law that prohibits teaching critical race theory. And inside that bill, you cannot teach kids anything about the civil rights movement, which means you can't say, I have a free speech. You can't say things like that. And I think we are better than that as a people.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for the question. You know, I grew up in El Paso, where Dr. Lawrence Nixon not only led that fight to integrate voting in the state of Texas, but founded the first chapter of the NAACP in the entire state in 1914 in my hometown. Never heard his name. Growing up, never knew his story. This is one of the most consequential figures in American history because not only did he do those two things, he really laid the groundwork for those who would follow him, including LBJ, signing the Voting Rights Act into law in 1965. Imagine now being prohibited by law from saying that guy's name, telling his story, or helping the kids of this state be proud of that guy who fought not just for himself, but for those very kids in these classrooms today. For Thelma White, another El Paso, and I guess this is where I'm going to pick out the mic to brag about hometown. She graduates from Douglas High School, valedictorian in 1954. Douglas High School, of course, the only high school she could attend because she still lived in the segregated South in Texas. Has the audacity to apply for admission at Texas Western College, now called the University of Texas at El Paso, and is denied entry solely based on the color of her skin. Remember, she graduated valedictorian. She, like Nixon, takes her case to the federal courts with the help of a well-known attorney named Thurgood Marshall. They win a decision that not only integrates higher education in El Paso, it opened up the doors of public higher education throughout the state of Texas. This extraordinary woman, I think she was a girl at the time, who had amazing courage. I mean, this is the Jim Crow South that she was fighting. She risked not only indignity and humiliation and rejection, really she risked her life by doing this. And not to tell her story in our classrooms, in our schools. Who are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? We're bigger than that stuff. Let's make sure that parents and teachers and the community come together to tell the full, true story and history of the state of Texas. Thank you very much.
Hi there. Hi there. My name is Adrian Urey, and I'm from Norton, Texas. And I'm a little bit of a gun rights person, so I'm asking you higher than medical legal that issues for Catholics. And yet,
Great, thank you for being here. And I love Portland. We did an event in Union County School. We did an event in Corpus Christi at the beginning of this campaign, and then went over to Portland and had meetings with folks, amazing community, ran there and absolutely. Questions about the second thing? Again, just to bring everyone on the same page, I know you know this, but it bears repeating. There is no right that is protected in our Constitution that is unlimited in its scope, right? The First Amendment, you all heard this a million times, it protects freedom of speech, but it does not protect your ability to yell fire in a crowded movie theater if there is a fire. Because you risk having everybody stand up, make a rush for the exits, trample each other. People might get injured or even die in the process. The Second Amendment, this right to bear arms, that begins with the description of a well-regulated militia. That is also not unbounded. There are restrictions within the Second Amendment. I'll give you a few. There's a reason that you don't see anybody walking around with a grenade launcher, or an anti-missile system, or riding a tank down the streets. Those sound ridiculous, right? That's what no one would ever want to do that, even if we could. But no one has an automatic machine in this state, or very few people do. It's not illegal, hasn't been outlawed, but in 1934, this country decided that it was sick and tired of seeing people shot up with these fully automatic machines, these weapons of war, and they made it prohibited for just about any American to own. Now tell me the last time we heard or read about or watched on broadcast television a story of a bunch of kids or a bunch of people or a bunch of anyone in the state of Texas or in this country shot up with a fully automatic machine gun. It happens. It has not happened in decades. Some may ask, well, listen, if you come up with laws that regulate our ability to own firearms, the law-abiding citizens will follow them, the criminals will not, so don't even begin to try. That shooter in Uvalde, the 18-year-old who got out one, two AR-15s and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, he followed the law. He didn't try to get that AR-15 when he was 15 or 16 or 17. He patiently waited until his 18th birthday to buy those two firearms, those hundreds of rounds of ammunition. I mentioned earlier a proposal to raise the minimum age of purchase for AR-15 or AK-47 to 21. If we have that on the books, which by the way, the entire city council, including the mayor of Uvalde, all agree with me. He and I don't see eye to eye on everything, but we agree on this much. We would have purchased 3 more years for a stroke of luck, or an intervention, or maybe access to mental health care, if mental health care was even the problem to begin with. A universal background check. You may say, look, that's why I went to a gun store the other day. I had to go through a background check. We have one in Texas. We don't have universal background checks, which means that in 2019, when a guy walked into a gun dealer, tried to buy an AR-15 and was rejected because he couldn't pass the background check, he was able to go buy a private seller the very same AR-15, no questions asked, and turn around and use it on the people in that community, killing 8 in the process. A red flag law? I think there are legitimate concerns about a red flag law, just to make sure that you know that I'm listening to you. We want to make sure that this is not a frivolous attempt to deny somebody of a constitutionally protected right. But at the same time, if someone who owns a firearm is saying, you know what, I'm going to shoot myself. Or you know what, I'm going to take this gun to school and shoot people there. Or you know what, I'm going to shoot my girlfriend or my wife. We've got to take that seriously. In 2019, after listening to Donald Trump talk about invasions and animals and infestations, Greg Abbott saying, Texans, you must defend yourselves and take matters in your own hands. This young man in Allen, Texas, buys an AK-47, drives it to El Paso, goes into a Walmart, right after posting a manifesto saying that he's come to repel that invasion he's heard about. He's come to repel the invasion of Hispanics in the state of Texas. Kills 23 people in a matter of minutes. In my hometown of El Paso, in most years, 20 people are not murdered the entire year. It's one of the safest cities in the United States of America. Well, that guy, when he orders that AK-47, his mom calls the police in Allen, Texas. She says, I have no idea what my son needs with this AK-47. And she may have expressed some other signs of distress, but no red flag laws on the book. The Allen Police Department said, we're sorry, man, good luck, you're on your own. That Uvalde shooter I mentioned earlier, he was sending so many signals off that he was in trouble that his friends called him the school shooter before he ever walked into that school and shot people. Don't you wish, because I know the parents in Uvalde wish, that we had some way to intervene before it's too late. Look, this issue is one that all of us in Texas care deeply about. And I will never try to persuade you to change your mind and feel somehow differently than you do the way you do today. But we have got to find some common ground able to do better. Because the alternative is consigning our kids and the generations that follow to this fate, to this fortune, to this future. And as a father of 3 kids who just started the school year Monday in El Paso, sophomore, freshman, and 6th grader, I'm going to be accountable to them and their judgment, and I will not fail. So I say, look, we may not all get what we want out of this debate, out of this conversation, and at the conclusion of it. But if we're willing to seek the common ground, if we seek consensus, if we're even willing, and I know this is a 4-letter word in American politics, if we're even willing to compromise, we'll be able to defend the Second Amendment and better protect the rights of our fellow Texans to stay alive, especially the kids in those classrooms. That's how I see the Second Amendment. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. For anyone who didn't hear this, she mentioned that, again, like probably most of us here, grew up with guns, has guns in the house, has a license to carry, which is a program that no longer exists in the state of Texas. It did. And it really was something that set us apart in a good way. We found a responsible way for our fellow Texans to carry firearms in public. We just said, look, you want a license to carry this gun in public? That's cool. Just go through this background check. Take this training so we are assured you have proficiency in the firearm that you're carrying. Make sure that we vet this so you're not a danger to yourself or anybody else, and you are good to go. The flip side of that is, if we find some problems in your background, if you are a violent criminal, for example, we're going to prevent you from carrying that firearm. Over the last 5 years, before the license to carry program was ended by Greg Whitaker, 38,000 times, law enforcement said that this person, this guy, this gal, is just too dangerous to carry guns in public. 38,000 times. That's why police chiefs, sheriffs, deputies, and officers begged the governor not to sign permitless carry in law. It said it's going to make our job that much harder. Not much more likely we'll be going up against somebody who shouldn't have that firearm to begin with. You know what? Today, more cops have been gunned down in the state of Texas than any other state in this nation. We've seen a predictable escalation in gun violence. The Vietnam veteran who called me to tell me he was upset about my position on AR-15s and AK-47s said he's even more upset about permitless carry because he is a firearms trainer. And he said in the LTC program that we used to have in Bethel, I would take people in who had to get this training, who didn't know which end of the gun the bullet came out of. I'm worried that they're now out on the streets, as are the 38,000 people who have those licenses to carry denied, and the tens of thousands more who knew better than to ever apply for a license to carry in the state of Texas because they never would have passed the background check. They're all out there, and we're none the wiser, and we're none the safer for it. So this question, whether you live on a ranch, whether you live in an apartment, I want you to be able to have that firearm. I want you to be able to use it for self-defense. You may just collect them. You may use them for sport. You may use them to hunt. It's really none of my business. It's not anybody's business like yours. But we have to do this responsibly. So in addition to some of those other proposals that I made earlier, just convince me that I'm going to listen to law enforcement. We are going to try to repeal that permitless carry bill, get back to a license to carry program in this state, so we can back to the responsible position of fellow ownership in the state of Texas.
This is going to be our last question. If we didn't get to you, you're going to stay afterwards and say hi and take a picture if you'd like.
Hi, my name is Karina. I'm
I lived in Victoria since I was like 6. I just recently graduated from one of our 3 high schools here. I just want to highlight my experience and how you can change the kids that are after me and help them enjoy their experience maybe a little bit more than I did. After COVID, there was kind of a shift in the school system. I think we all kind of felt it as students. You could walk through the hallway and you can kind of just see like the faces and the exhaustion that's really just going on, not only the students, but the teachers as well. And I kind of just want to know how you would help the curriculum in Texas and the students and the teachers in Texas kind of feel like school is an okay place to be. It's not just a matter of laziness that kids don't want to be there. It's truly a big weight on their shoulders and the teacher's shoulders and the administrator's shoulders and the janitors and the cafeteria ladies, everybody there. I just want to know how you can make Texas schools a little bit more enjoyable for everyone involved.
Great. Good question. Thank you for asking that. We were in Laredo, Texas at the start of this year, and a 6th grade middle school teacher, her name's Max, I've seen, she said, the reason that I'm opposed to the STAR test, in addition to what I shared earlier about it, doesn't really effectively measure the things that are most important to the child. But she said, I just want you to remember we just had 2 years of pandemic, 2 years of learning. 2 years where these kids in these schools have lost their grandparents, in some cases to COVID, or their parents have lost their jobs, or their families have lost their homes, and they're going from one couch in one house to another night after night. She said, that's what I'm literally right now trying to keep these kids alive. She mentioned the level of suicidal ideation that we're seeing in our schools. And look, I hate to talk about that, I hate to think about that, because I've got kids and I don't want to even imagine that. But it is happening right now. And if we fail to confront it, we fail to face it, we're not going to do anything in order to change it and to make it better. So looking at work of those high stakes, high pressure tests, where teachers spend not a few minutes or a few hours or a few days, but weeks teaching their children how to take a test versus teaching their children the subject matter that they are an expert in, that they have the experience in, instead of stoking their curiosity and letting those kids loose to be able to pursue their dreams. That is so hard for those teachers, and so hard for those kids. As the parent of kids who are going through that, it's hard on your entire family. And it can make it difficult to make that learning experience as enjoyable as you're describing right now. So, in addition to ending the STAR, and replacing it with something like a diagnostic, it's like a point-in-time measurement. You don't prepare for it, you don't test for it. We just want to know how you're doing it, how we get more resources to you, instead of the STAR, which is how can we punish you or threaten you or scare you about whatever. That's a great start. The next thing that I want to do is to make sure that we're working with someone at the top of the education structure in Texas who really gets it. And that's why after we win this, after we work together to win this race, I'm going to appoint a classroom teacher as a TDA commissioner in the state of Texas. Evidence of what you're just describing right now is the fact that we're losing teachers by the thousands, right? I was just reading an article here in Victoria about the CFO of the Victoria Independent School District, who's talking about how hard it is to hire up and the classroom teachers, the counselors, the librarians, but as you mentioned, the custodial staff, the school bus drivers, the administrators, everybody who makes public education possible. It's a real crisis. For my youngest in his 5th grade year, he just completed in June, the entire academic year, he didn't have a single permanent classroom teacher. All he had was subs, and I love subs. They're amazing. But the permanent classroom teacher, the consistency of that person's presence with those kids, that's another thing that not only makes learning possible, but it's going to elevate their attitudes and their moods and their enjoyment and their expectation of coming to school the next day. So I want to sit down with you, with the teachers that you have, with the local administrators in this school district, and find out what we need to do as your partner in Austin to make sure that we have the best public schools on the planet right here in the state of Texas. Victoria